All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Squats and Sober Thoughts podcast with your host, Max LaRock. This episode is going to be titled Round and Round We Go. So, first of all, hi. It's been a minute, to say the least. There's a good chance, if you are currently listening to this, you are not new to the podcast or you follow along social media. So, I am just going to jump right into things today. A few episodes ago, I discussed the idea of expressing my journey back to therapy and the work I would be putting in on myself to improve my self-worth and overall self-acceptance via the podcast. But it got heavy. And to be quite frank, it is still very heavy. A few weeks ago, after a breathwork event, which had the focused intention of letting go, coupled with a very intense processing session of EMDR 2 days after the breathwork, the only way I could describe how I was feeling was that I felt like I was an open wound exposed to the world. I felt extremely vulnerable and in a very unsafe way. Now, as much as being vulnerable is great and all, when you simply feel unsafe in your own skin, it is a very unsettling feeling. To then put my journey out into the online space, on top of also trying to be present with my clients, simply was not feasible, nor was it fair to myself. And if these last 6 months have taught me anything, it's that I really need to start being a whole lot nicer to myself. So, simply put, out of fear and a newfound self-respect for myself, I had to retreat. So my main reason for why I'm back here today is to recap on some of the positive changes that have been happening amidst the heaviness of these last 6 months. So, as mentioned from a time frame standpoint, it's been roughly 6 months now that I have been working with my psychologist, Stu, every second Thursday. So firstly, shout out to Stu. That guy is an absolute beauty. I can't thank him enough for the patience and perspective that he has taught me in such a short period of time. I know I've said this in past episodes, but therapy really, truly does hit differently when you show up with your own best interests. The first thing we began working on was slowing the F down. Now, if you've listened to previous podcasts, you are probably super confused why I said slow the F down and not the normal F word. But full disclosure, I do plan on posting this to YouTube now that I have my fancy new camera and mic set up. And I don't actually know how to edit out swear words yet. So, with the goal of eventually being monetized one day, I'm trying to be a little bit more conscientious, however you say that word, of my swear words, until at least I know how to edit them out. And then at that point, I'll probably bring back the F word because realistically, it's me. So just bear with me for the next little bit if you don't mind. The main reason behind slowing down was to become more present in my day-to-day life. It's next to impossible to recognize the good that is going on in our lives when we are going at 1,000,000 miles a minute, jumping from one validating task to the next. It does not leave room for stillness, and without stillness, we cannot appreciate the things we currently have. For those who don't know, I secretly enjoy gardening, and I love flowers. Hence why, for those watching on YouTube, the bottom third of my sleeve is actually my nieces and nephews' birth month flowers. An analogy he used early on with me was if you were on the highway driving at 100 kilometers an hour, or 60 miles per hour for my American friends, can you actually see the detail and vibrancy that comes with each flower as you pass by? I love this because it presented a visual representation of how I live my daily life. I have a really hard time acknowledging the hard work I am putting in and the effort that goes into personal development. The unfortunate trade-off with doing the work is it is arguably one of the most challenging things to continue doing because of the delayed gratification that comes along with it. Self-love, unfortunately, does not happen overnight. Like many, if not all of us to some degree, I have a really hard time not comparing myself to those around me. I often feel like because I'm not married yet and I'm 33, I also don't have a house yet, which circumstantially is absolutely a me problem. If I grew up in any other friend circle, this really wouldn't be something that feels so prominent for myself. It just feels as though everything I am in the process of working towards isn't worth acknowledging because I am not there yet. In my subjective opinion, and this is something I often speak to clients about, is if you cannot learn to celebrate the process, you won't know how to appreciate the accomplishment. To relate this to fitness, I have seen and experienced personally, on countless occasions, the mentality that I will be happy when I lose 30 pounds. I'm going to put that in air quotes for those not watching. The unfortunate truth behind this is no, you probably won't. If you are unwilling to look inward to put in the work to love yourself now, you likely will not be willing to do so when you arrive at your target weight. To add some nuance to this from the fitness standpoint, I will say that the confidence that comes with beginning to exercise absolutely can be the driving force to create internal change as well. To shine a light back on me, there is no effing house in the world or career accomplishment that is going to make me love myself. It's simple as that. I think the most fascinating piece throughout all of this and my newfound understanding of the nervous system and the role it plays in my journey or our journey of self-love. A reoccurring theme over these last few months has been the recognition of self-sabotage and learning to understand the role it plays in my day-to-day decision-making. There's been lots of reflection on how self-sabotage has impacted my previous relationships. This includes intimate relationships, friendships, and client coaching relationships. And in all honesty, there is a lot here that I am not very proud of. But I am finally beginning to accept my role and my responsibility within these situations. Essentially, because things were good, I simply didn't feel worthy of the good, or I did not trust the good. So, on a subconscious level, I began making self-sabotaging choices, which in my case looked like beginning to smoke weed again. There was genuinely so much fear around the idea of safety and stability that I actively began trying to create chaos. On a conscious level, it made no sense and was incredibly frustrating that even though I really want this change, why do I keep reverting back to maladaptive coping techniques? I despise the fact that I continue to retreat back to weed out of fear. Weed is my safety blanket. I use it to keep me small. I use it as an excuse to not put my subjective opinions online. I use it as a way to make me feel less lonely when I'm sitting by myself. I also use it as a way to numb out the big feelings that I was never shown how to safely express. This is where the introduction of breathwork has been an absolute game changer for me. Once again, in my subjective opinion, somatic therapy needs to be coupled with cognitive therapy. You can learn all about the conscious mind, but if you continue to revert back to whatever negative coping habits you may have, there is evidently something below the surface that needs to be addressed. Your body holds on to negative emotions, experiences, traumas, etc. That energy needs to be moved. There is many different ways for individuals to heal on a somatic level. Breathwork, chanting, screaming, psychedelic therapy, even just simply exercising can be a somatic release for some individuals. If you are currently seeing a therapist, psychologist, whatever, and you continue to slip back into your non-desired coping mechanisms, whether that be food, alcohol, Tinder, whatever it may be, I highly recommend you looking into the world of somatic therapy. And if you do, prepare to cry. I have cried a lot in these last 6 months. And for those who don't know, there is a huge release of energy that comes after a good cry. That is simply one way for your body to release these negative events. However, with all that being said, it was genuinely eye-opening to have Stu tell me after our particularly heavy session about self-sabotage that my central nervous system is wired for chaos. Wired for chaos. What does that even mean? Well, let's quickly break down the brain and how it goes and how it works from the ages of 0 to 8. Now, keep in mind, I am not a neuroscientist. I am a personal trainer who owns a gym. I also am a life coach. So keep in mind the brain specifics here are going to be pretty surface level. So if these are at all incorrect, feel free to just let it go. I'm just trying to prove a point here. Between the ages of 0 and 7 are our programming years. During these years, children will spend most of their time in alpha and theta brainwave cycles, which is the same state that a person is in when they are in hypnosis or meditation. Between the ages of 5 to 8, the brainwaves have changed into an alpha frequency, which is 8 to 13 cycles per second. This is the point at which the analytical mind begins to form. Children start to interpret and draw conclusions from their environment. So, now that you just got some super in-depth neuroscience, let's briefly look back on my childhood. So, for those who don't know, my dad was an RCMP officer, and we transferred a lot. I was born in The Pas, Manitoba. Probably haven't heard of that one before. 18 months later, we transferred to Cranberry Portage, Manitoba for a very brief stint. We then were off to Langley, BC. Shortly after that, we were off to Hay River, Northwest Territories. We then transferred back to Brandon, Manitoba for under a year, and then we were off to Ottawa, Ontario for our quote-unquote final transfer. This means that by the time I was 8, I had already lived in 5 different towns at this point. So, to come to conclusion, a relatively chaotic first few years. Really quickly, I do want to touch on the topic of blame. Now, I know just from that quick little stint there, I could easily, by the sounds of it, blame my parents for the choices that I make today because my nervous system is wired for it. But that is nonsense. Blaming your past endeavors, whether they were your fault or not, will get you nowhere in your journey of healing. You must learn to accept the hardships and misfortunes you experienced because blaming won't change your past. It will just lead to unresolved resentment over a situation that cannot be changed. And in my case, my parents were simply raising me with the tools they had, and they made the majority of their decisions in my best interests. As much as it was predominantly focused from a financial gain standpoint, it does not negate the intention behind their decisions. They simply didn't know any better. The important piece here is by taking the time to understand the role my nervous system plays, it has allowed me to be much more compassionate with myself on this journey of self-worth and personal development. For those who follow me on social media, 2 weeks ago I took off to Invermere, which is one of my favorite places in BC. I took 1 whole week off of social media, which after the first few days of phone withdrawals and phone FOMO, it was absolutely glorious. The trip was really important for me because it was the first time since going back to therapy that I have taken an extended period of time to sit with myself and acknowledge the immense amount of effort I have been putting into learning more about myself. And to be quite frank, this means longer than a 5-minute daily meditation because, in all honesty, how deep into our thoughts are we really getting within a 5-minute time frame? What this trip really highlighted and emphasized to me was that I'm trying. And I'm trying really hard. And we often get so caught up in our bullshit that we don't allow ourselves to recognize the changes that are happening in real time. This trip really reinforced how absolutely imperative it is to reflect and affirm the changes you are making. If you are on a weight loss journey, you're working on your financial health, you're building a business, or whatever awesome feat you may be working towards, please just do yourself a favor and give yourself the time and space to acknowledge how damn hard you're working. Because only you know what you're doing behind closed doors. And to be quite frank, if you're not putting in the work behind closed doors and you are expecting change, well, then stop lying to yourself. This journey has a lot of ups and downs, and as humans, we are unfortunately really good at highlighting the downs. Highlighting the good takes practice, and when we are in a position of stillness, that practice becomes much more achievable. There's a lot more I would like to speak on and catch up over these last few months. And if I hadn't written a whole lot of notes for this, it would have been absolutely in complete and utter unhinged chaos, and I probably would have went on every tangent imaginable because there's been a lot I've wanted to say. But I'm going to give myself a little grace and leave it at that. I'm hoping to be back here on a more semi-regular basis, and when the creative spark is there, I fully intend on being as present as I possibly can. With all that being said, thank you to anyone who listens to this podcast, shares my work on social media, or supports me in any way possible. Please follow me on YouTube as well at MaxLaRockFit. I am currently learning to edit long-form content, which is apparently a metric F-ton of work. So hopefully you will be seeing a lot more on there soon. And if you wouldn't mind, please leave the podcast a 5-star review. Whether you are listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, it really does help me out a ton, and it gets the podcast into new ears. Lastly, if you are new here, I suggest you go back and listen to my previous episodes. This will likely give you a little more insight into what the hell I'm talking about here. To wrap things up, much love to everyone out there listening. I genuinely appreciate each and every one of you. And as mentioned, I hope to be back on here on a much more regular basis. It may not be as structured as today was, but we're going to do our best. Take care and have a great rest of your day.